All right, there you go. Um, Welcome to MoLabs, the latest episode. We're thrilled that you joined. We are thrilled that you're joining us today. For those that who don't know, MoLabs is a series of webinars run by MoFilm, and the goal is to provide AI support for creators around the world. We have a really large community of creators. And we appreciate that this new technology is new for everyone. So we want to take you on that kind of journey of discovery along with us. And also to help empower you to feel like you understand it and know how to use it as well. So this is season 2, episode 3, Generative AI, a year in review. It's actually worth saying, all of our old episodes are actually on our MoFilm YouTube page. So it's worth having a look at those and watching some of them. There are some good ones in there. This time we're doing something a little bit different. I think we are looking at generative AI a little bit more holistically versus doing a deep dive into a specific tool or platform. We have a very special guest who I'll intro in a minute. But firstly, I would like to intro myself and Harriet, who are the co-hosts of MoLabs Season 2. I'm Sophie Robertson. I'm an executive producer based in the UK. And we have Harriet Beaumont, who is my co-host, a senior creative producer also based in the UK.
Hi, everyone.
And our guest is Rebecca Sykes, partner at the Brandtech Group. Becky heads up the group's emerging technology division, especially around generative AI and Web3. And she advises many of the Brandtech Group's clients on best practices and processes. And actually, MoFilm is part of the Brandtech Group. For those of you who don't know that, and the Brandtech Group are all about connecting brands with technology and helping demystify a lot of this new technology for brands and helping guide them along the way. Because Becky's experience is technology as it relates to brands, this webinar will be particularly relevant to creators or creatives who work with brands or create branded content, and then obviously it will be relevant to brands themselves. Sorry, I feel like I've just said brands a lot there. It's also worth saying that if you have any questions that come up throughout, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll tackle them either as we go, or we've got a Q&A, some time for Q&A at the end. So yes, today we are, the webinar is entitled Generative AI, a year in review. We've got 3 chapters that we're going to run through. The first one is looking back at 2023, the top generative AI themes. We're also going to have a look into the evolution of creative platforms. And then 2024, the top generative AI predictions from that Becky sees. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the lovely Becky Sykes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here and discuss Gen AI with you all. It's incredibly exciting, especially in this space. Can you hear me? You can. Okay, good. It's incredibly exciting, especially in this particular space. I think creativity and production specifically is one of the deepest verticals for Gen AI to touch at the beginning of its kind of mainstream adaptation. And so, there's just a huge amount to discuss and a huge amount of progress to review. We are 1 year on from the launch of kind of ChatGPT and this technology being accessible to everybody. And the difference a year can make is really dramatic. So it will be really lovely to kind of run through this with you. So we're going to start with the top 5 Gen AI themes from 2023. There are loads. You could have bucketed this in many ways. So this is the way that I've kind of been looking at some of the big themes and moments of the year. So the first one is probably unsurprising. It's around investment and the unbelievable amount of investment that poured into this space, even in a relatively dry year for other sort of venture investing. This was an incredibly abundant space, but in a really particular way. And that's what I found interesting, is it's a lot of big, established, incredibly well distributed technology, investing in smaller, more agile sort of startup tech in the Gen AI space. Some of it not that small, I should point out. OpenAI now, not a small company at all. But we're seeing this investment flow from these big established tech investors kind of to the tune of many, many billions. So many of you will know Microsoft came out of the gate very early in January of 2023 with a $10 billion investment in OpenAI for a 49% stake of that business. That is now a very tight partnership within the industry. And so we're seeing a lot of evolution and innovation happening in lockstep between Microsoft's use of OpenAI and then OpenAI kind of pushing the technology forward. The sort of second, the big contending foundation model comes from Anthropic. And actually, we saw Amazon invest $4 billion in Anthropic in September. And very quickly after, the next month in October, we saw Google invest a further $2 billion. So they managed to raise almost $7 billion in the space of about 6 weeks of last year. So again, they're incredibly well funded. So there's lots of development happening and lots of kind of technological advancement really at pace. It is definitely an arms race. So we're seeing that. These are two of the biggest that I've just mentioned. But even on the smaller, more regionalized side, we saw Mistral, which is the French kind of answer to OpenAI, raise 400 million euros of VC investment towards the end of last year, when they were only 6 months old and had a 2 billion euro valuation. So there's just incredible pace, incredible funding flowing in. So the capability, and I guess the thing to take away is this technology is going to keep surging forward because there is so much investment, so much kind of opportunity that there's going to be no let up in kind of how that continues to flow. So one big kind of exciting thing to have noted. The second, which kind of leads from that, I guess, is around the speed of development and the shipping of kind of new versions of the products that these companies are delivering. It's really unprecedented how quickly they release new versions, new models, but also the leaps in performance as we look at the different models and how much they improve in these very, very short development windows. So a bit later, we're going to look at a little bit of the technology itself and what's possible and how that's changed over time. But actually, if you just look at how quickly new models are being released, it's really impressive. So as many of you know, OpenAI launched ChatGPT, or version 3.5, back in November of 2022. By March 2023, they already had GPT-4 in the market, which was a significant improvement in things like comprehension, reasoning, and knowledge retention. And then by November, GPT-4 Turbo was already in market, which had more great developments and much longer context windows. So you could provide more information in order to get more contextually relevant answers, or that the system could understand greater context from you and then answer your questions. But also moving into multimodal, so being able to prompt with images, which is a huge leap forward and is a huge leap forward in the creation of video as well, which we're going to talk about a bit more later. So that was incredibly quick. Midjourney, as a kind of image generation counterpoint, had a very similar cadence. So they launched V4 in November of 2022. By March, we were using version 5, and they snuck V6 in just in December at the end of last year. So again, kind of getting into a third version in a very short period of time. And the difference between Midjourney version 4 and the capabilities of version 6 are literally astonishing. So there is so much change there, and the pace of change. You can map something very similar with Stability, with Adobe, with lots of the other tools. And what we're seeing now from these product suites is they're more nuanced. So it's a more specific suite of tools. It's not just this magic generate button, and if you don't like what you get, you have to kind of regenerate and regenerate. We're seeing sophisticated workflows. We're seeing regional specific generation. We're seeing edit capability. More and more of the kind of things we saw early on in painting and out painting, but just much more creator control. So you're able to be much more specific about the thing that you're generating. It's less of a gamble. It's much more refined, I would say. Onto the third one. This is a biggie. And one of my favorites, maybe because I'm just must be a legal nerd, but legal and safety is a huge part of this conversation, and it really dominated a lot of the headlines of last year. I think for brands, it's one of the most kind of fear-inducing parts of embracing technology like this is that it is moving so fast and that there is so much about it that's unprecedented. So the legal side is big, but also for individuals, how much of my data do I give to these learning models? What happens to my work when I'm interacting with them? So I think there's a lot of concern. Generally, that concern last year kind of came into two buckets. The first was copyright, and that kind of has two elements to it. It's whether I'm infringing on somebody else's copyright when I generate something, but also is what I make protectable. Can I, protect the thing I've generated and maybe really crafted prompts and rounds of prompting for, or is that fair game for anybody to use and benefit from once I've made it? So copyright being one part of the issue. The second part being privacy. And that's the piece around data. So how much of my data to which platforms can I opt out of training new models, or is that just a prerequisite to using the tools? So these things have all become sort of big questions within the industry. I should say throughout the course of 2023, there was a very dramatic change in how the largest providers treated trust. So they really started to lean into the fact that they needed kind of enterprise level terms and conditions. These were not tools being used just by individuals, just for experimentation. These were now tools being used by large brands and corporations, people who had to make commitments to the way that they had produced work, or by agencies or creators who needed to assure brands that they could use the work. So there were lots of changes here. We saw trust portals launched by big players like Stability, OpenAI, and Anthropic. And these include a whole suite of the kind of technical documentation required to provide those guarantees. But we also saw the major tech companies increasingly agree to kind of take the heat and take the risk for potential copyright infringement. So people like Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Adobe, and Shutterstock all offered protection or mitigation against copyright infringement, so that if you create something that infringes copyright in some way, that was not a fault of your own, but of the model, that they provide some kind of protection for that, which is a marked kind of change in the way that the flow of indemnity worked across this space. The fourth one is kind of connected and similar, but somewhat different, and that's regulation. So in the regulatory landscape, this is very different to other forms of technology. So with things like social media, for example, we already had the technology out and live in the world, being used, even being aware of its impact and potentially its harms before we saw any regulation or attempt to regulate social media in a meaningful way. In AI, regulation has been early, and it's coming from both governments and existing regulatory bodies. So we're seeing a very different kind of approach to AI, and possibly because of some of these concerns around safety, etc., are so loud within the space. So you'll be aware, I'm sure, of most of these. The EU AI Act was put in motion towards the end of last year. It's the most stringent of all the regulation. It's both risk-driven and rules-based. So there's about 2 years available to implement the EU AI Act if it applies to you. But I think many companies are going to move faster than that to sort of get on board with the direction of regulation. We saw the UK had an AI safety summit, which was more principles-based. It was more about a kind of an approach to AI, bringing together lots of different countries in kind of collaboration to sign a kind of almost a treaty for how AI should be treated. And then we saw in the US, Biden and the kind of Washington declaration, which is the most permissive of all of the kind of regulation that we've seen come out, and it's more to do with using kind of federal purchasing power to drive market behavior. So kind of trying to steer markets that way through steer companies that way through market factors. But overall, the thing to be aware of is that the overarching themes in all of the regulation are transparency and disclosure. So knowing what the data is that's gone into training the models, sort of ending that black box era, and then also disclosing when you are using AI. So I think some of the social platforms have also put regulation or advice, at least, out to creators about to disclose when they're using AI. We still don't know if you'll be forced to do it like you are with ads, but there may be some move towards making sure consumers are aware when they're engaging with AI versus something that was shot in the real world. And the last one is around culture, and I think this one is incredibly important. We've seen that AI is an absolute lightning rod for how people feel about all sorts of technology, not just AI in and of itself, but actually technology as a whole and its kind of fast progress in our lives. Hallucinate was actually dictionary.com's word of the year, which is indicative. We talk about hallucinations in AI being when the model doesn't know how to answer a particular question, and so it makes up the answer, and that was the word of the year. We saw quite a few big cultural themes emerge as well. One of the biggest cultural moments within AI was the writers' strike, and it was really an interesting outcome for that, because the ruling, if I can kind of paraphrase, was that a studio could not use AI on behalf of a writer, to disintermediate a writer or to replace them, but a writer could use AI to assist them in the delivery of a commission of any kind. So this is really the technology coming down on the side of the individual and the side of the creator. So it being a resource for a creator and not a way to displace or disenfranchise a creator. And I think that's incredibly important for our industry, that was the earliest kind of outcome of a real head-to-head like this. And I hope that sets a really good kind of cultural precedent for lots of other areas and creative communities that will be affected by AI, that the AI comes down on the side of how individuals benefit, not how larger corporations do. So that's going to be really critical, and we watch that very carefully and very closely. There are a number of other lawsuits from different creators and class action suits being brought against different foundation models to do with whether or not the use of their art or their creation in training models is fair use or not. We're closely following these. They still are in existence and still running. So there's lots more to come, I think, in this space. But it's really divided the kind of AI lovers from the AI haters. And two interesting sort of factions have come up and sprung up from this. So there is the effective altruists. You may see EA on the end of somebody's handle on X or something, if they're an effective altruist. This is the group that focuses on maximizing the impact of charitable giving, and they consider AI safety to be one of the most important issues facing the world. And this is where they want to kind of really consider things like pauses in the development of technology and lots of AI safety concerns. Elon Musk and Sam Bankman-Fried are two interesting backers of that movement. And then you have the kind of opposite movement, which is called effective accelerationism. You may see EAC on somebody's handle, and that focuses on the kind of relentless technological growth and the benefit of technology in our lives to solve problems like never before. And some of the famous followers are investors like Gary Tan from Y Combinator and Mark Andreessen, people like that. So it's really kind of driven a bit of a wedge between what side you're on. And we saw the massive conflict erupt at OpenAI, kind of based on some of these themes and ideas. So that is the fifth of the big kind of themes of 2023. Should I pause? Is there anything you want, or are there any questions that you wanted me to go through, Harriet or Sophie, or should I come into like kind of an assessment of where we are with the creative platforms?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I think one thing that comes up is, and certainly relevant to MoFilm and our creator community, is the subject of copyright and privacy, right? Like, what is it that that we can do as individuals to keep ourselves in check on that, and things that we should and shouldn't be doing to make sure that we are managing that in the right way, even at this point where it's still, you know, it's all being developed and worked out at the same time? What is it that we can take home today and know how to act?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, while there's lots of sort of work being done on the whole landscape, like as a user, what can you do to remain on the safe side of that? And so I think the best way to think about it is your prompt is incredibly important. Your prompt is either it has a degree of risk associated with it. So if I was to give you an example of like the very highest risk type of prompt, it would be a prompt that infringes copyright in and of itself. So, for example, if I asked for an image of Wonder Woman riding a horse, I am 100% likely to infringe on copyright, pretty much, because I've asked for a copyrighted entity to appear in my image. So I'm very likely to infringe, and that is on the user, right? That's a creator error. It's still high risk if I incite infringement in a prompt. So I may not, let me think of a good example of this. So I may not ask directly, but say I said, can you create me a logo for a new fast food restaurant featuring 2 golden arches? I didn't say McDonald's, but I incited copyright infringement because I meant McDonald's. Okay, that is still on the part of the user. That is still a risk, and if a claim was brought, that would likely fall under the user responsibility. A much lower risk is when you prompt for things in very generic terms. You know, I need an image of a kitchen or a bathroom or something that's not specifically ownable. That's much lower risk. And the very lowest risk is when you're working with brands who have particular visual identity and you prompt for that as well. So they use a certain color palette, a certain style, a certain whatever it is, and you've put all of this kind of brand context in, or individual context, as well as this kind of low risk idea. That's kind of in the safest place. So I think if you can kind of keep that spectrum in your mind, from like what is the riskiest to what is the safest way to prompt, that's one way to kind of stay on the right side.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. And I think this is something that we've talked about before when we've done previous episodes of MoLabs, is about using your own human sense check on these things as well, right? Like that's so important with all of this. It's like not allowing it to take complete control of what is produced, and using your own mind and sensibilities to be able to judge whether something feels right or not, too. Your intuition, I suppose.
Absolutely. And the model is never going to tell you, hey, this one might be infringing. So you really have to come at everything with that lens, right? You know. Yeah,
cool.
Keep you're the human in the loop.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Shall we keep going? And I'm sure we'll get more questions on stuff as we keep talking. So
yeah, absolutely. So the next thing we wanted to do was a little review of creative platforms and where they've come across the journey of 2023, where we stand now. So if we go into this, I think it's obvious to us all, having followed the progress, that today is as bad as it's ever going to be, and that is always going to be the case. If you're looking at any of the tools or the modalities and you're thinking, I don't know if it's got the quality or the fidelity for the kind of work I want to create, I'm not sure if it's good enough, I'm not sure if I can be nuanced enough, the advice is kind of come back tomorrow, because it is really progressing at such a pace, and whatever you're seeing today, it really is as bad as it's ever going to be. So if we look at a few examples, this is one of my favorites, this next one. So this is using the same prompt in Midjourney version 1 back in March of 2022, so before mainstream use of Midjourney, and in the same prompt again 12 months later in Midjourney version 4, and you can see that the two images are like night and day, worlds apart in terms of quality. If you keep going, we've run the same prompt in Midjourney 5.2 back in October of 23, and you see it gets a little more natural. Midjourney definitely has a look, a kind of aesthetic to it that is programmed in. It's trained for like that kind of the aesthetic that people move towards, that they like. But it does give it a very Midjourney look, a very AI look, and it becomes harder to use in creative work because it maybe doesn't look like the style you're trying to create. So then if you run the same prompt again in Midjourney version 6, you see even more nuance there in January of this year. And also this move to more natural looking people, more textures. The hair is a little messier. It's everything in early image gen was very perfect skin, no imperfections, no nuance, no richness. And you're seeing lots and lots more of that now as standard. And of course you can prompt really carefully to bring more of that.
Becky, sorry to interrupt the flow. Is that coming from what people are prompting for, or is that coming from what they're developing at Midjourney? Like they're understanding that that's what people want. Like where does that change happen?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of both. So you can, there are preset ways inside of Midjourney, for example, and of course, Midjourney is just one tool. They're very controllable tools across the Stable Diffusion suite and other things. But if we stick with Midjourney just for the example's sake, there are preset ways in which you can turn the style back to raw, right? So you're taking away that kind of Midjourney look and other things. So there are preset ways in which you can make those changes. But also I think we're seeing more sophisticated prompting just coming from lots of different people. And of course, people are aware of what's being made. The models are, re-ingesting what's being made and being aware of where trends are going and moving in that way. So I think it's both more configurable, but also you've got more preset options within the platforms as well.
Cool, thank you.
And if we move on to the next one, then you'll see another class of kind of image enhancer now becoming really commonplace, which are the upscalers. So on the original from Midjourney version 6 is on the left here, and on the right you can see the kind of upscaled version. You can really notice it. It's basically like it's been retouched, right? You can see in the eyes. Eyes are often a real problem for AI. Same as hands, but less obvious. They just look a little dead behind the eyes. It's not got a lot of light there, not a lot of like reflection or refraction. So you can see in the eyes, the kind of shine on her hair, the lighting feels more natural. So it's as if it's been retouched. And we had quite a solid core original image to start with here, where the image is less high definition. You get an even greater effect when you start to move into the upscaling. So you've got another kind of level of nuance that we're able to create when we're pairing image generation with upscaling as well. So this is a really exciting development in generation.
It's almost like we are seeing retouch in reverse to what we're used to traditionally, of like taking away imperfections and adding more of a sheen. Actually, what we're doing here is adding the human elements back in. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Actually, that's so true. I've never thought about it like that. But yes, that's exactly it. You're adding the humanity back in to imagery that otherwise was becoming too one tone, too not lived in. One of the challenges with upscalers is they age you, because you if you're upscaling faces, because they're looking for more detail, more nuance, but you're then becoming, you've got more texture, more discoloration, more wrinkles, more lines. So there's also ways in which to kind of control for them so that you're getting the same level of fidelity you get with traditional retouching. You can be quite precise. But yeah, I love that extra layer. We've also done this a lot with things like food, and you can imagine something goes from like generic image to kind of food porn. It becomes incredible once you start upscaling and playing with the level of detail, and it's as if you shot in a very bespoke studio environment to capture exactly that texture of the the roasting of the vegetable or whatever it was, and you're able to really get to this level of clarity, which is a kind of creator's dream, I think, because you're getting to a point in which you can really art direct in a very precise way.
And this video is basically demonstrating what we saw in the previous slide.
Exactly. It really shows around the eyes. When you kind of scroll across, you can see like how the eye changes and that kind of thing as you're going to a before and after, essentially, from the upscaler. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then what I did with this afterwards is I took the same prompt and I've thrown it into Dico here. And immediately, and I'm not joking about how fast this platform is. It's like as you're typing, the images are being generated. So before you finish the prompt, the image is generated, and as you add to the prompt, the image changes in front of you. So it's incredibly, incredibly fast. You then need to upscale it to get to the level of definition you might require, but I can then do that and then apply motion to it, and as quickly I'm now looking at a video clip of that static. So if we think about where we were 14 months ago, when we had that very fuzzy, pixelated, distorted image of a woman with some sort of knittedness across her, and now we're able to in real time create a very natural looking woman in the jumper, which is all part of the prompt, the original prompt, who can have some natural movement. And since in seconds, we have just come so far in the terms of generation. And of course, the real benefit here is how you stitch tools together. So you take this video, you go and upscale it, you make it 4K, you bring it back in, you add some other, and then you're putting scenes together. You're suddenly getting a suite of tools that actually is very dexterous. You can use them to really great effect as a creator. So that's becoming incredibly exciting as well.
So how are you moving between the tools, Becky? Are you taking the image and you're literally taking an image file and putting that into this platform, or are you taking your prompt for the image and putting it into that? Like how does that bit work?
Both. So for example, in the upscaling, often if you take the image and then you also include your original prompt so that the model knows what you were aiming for in the beginning, the upscaling is much more efficient. You take the imagery, you can then put it into a different tool. You can, I think this mixing and matching of different tools for different purposes and the flow back and forth between tools is how we're getting to see some of the best AI output. So it's still very much a craft. It's still building your own workflow, knowing how to do that, and being in control of lots of the different elements or variables within the creative process. But we're just seeing so much more specificity about what's possible.
Thank you.
This is a quick example, and I absolutely credit Tristan Wolfe here, who, if you don't follow, you probably should. He's fantastic and does a lot of experimentation using AI tools for production and generation. He took the same core Midjourney static image, and he then ran it through 3 different video platforms. You can see here on Stable Video, they're creating very, very short clips, so they're sort of looped, but it's a much more reliable video outcome. It's kind of the camera is being held static, and you're getting kind of a normal walking pattern. When you come into Runway, which has been the market leader for a long time and still has a lot of tools that can get very precise with things like Motion Brush, where you can apply motion just to one very specific part of your scene, for example. But in this particular instance, with no parameters added and no direction added, you're seeing a slightly odd kind of slow-mo walk. So it's a stylized version. And then in the last one, in MoLabs, you're seeing a much more radical kind of camera motion to it. So different styles, which you might need for different types of filmmaking, actually, and you would choose for different reasons. So again, some of the best output that I'm seeing is choosing between a whole suite of tools based on the kind of standard output of them, those that have the greatest parameters to allow you specific control and the kind of style you're looking for your overall output. So there's lots to play with here and lots to experiment with. But at the beginning of last year, sorry, there were no video tools available. And in fact, I would argue that even a couple of months ago, there really weren't many credible video tools that you could play with and experiment with that might give you short clips that could be used in real work. And already that is a very different landscape. So this is my kind of view of looking at the kind of creative landscape, especially when it's connected to kind of visual output or visual and audio output. I think you have to break it down into these 3 buckets. First of all, looking at kind of approach. If you're trying to create hyperrealism, so if you're trying to create video of a real person, I don't know, who's like moving their hands or doing something, that is incredibly difficult, and you might just be better off shooting a real person who's doing that thing, because the energy and effort it would take to get to that level of realism in something like that is going to be incredibly difficult. If you have a somewhat surreal concept that's more montage driven, I actually go back to like music video that gives you some of that freedom and that play. you're in this is like a world of fun in AI, because there's so much possibility. The more hyper realistic kind of macro stuff is still hardest. So like really think about what you're trying to make and whether these are the right tools. The second bucket is looking at the tools available. As we've just seen, there are loads of them, and they all approach things slightly differently, giving you slightly different levels of control. So really stitching together different tools is really important still. And that brings me to kind of the last point about workflow. There is still no single platform magic button that I think is going to give a creator everything that they need, but there is a way to kind of start stitching together a workflow that really works for you for a particular kind of output, that can deliver really incredible outcomes. And the next slide is just a little bit of an example of that. If you play it, I can sort of talk over it a little bit. This is the output, I believe, of a runway contest, and actually it's the stitching together of multiple statics with elements of motion applied, using a whole range of tools, from runway to Pika Labs to Topaz. And you can see it's a particular style. It's montage driven, so you're getting short clips of motion, not one long kind of shot, and you're getting small amounts of motion from what is otherwise a kind of almost portrait-esque framing. So it's a particular style, but it works incredibly well, and they've managed to tie together a look and feel that feels consistent, even an environment that feels consistent across, you know, a longer piece. So it's just incredibly powerful to see what's possible if you're using a workflow that really works and that you're able to kind of manipulate. Okay, should I go on to predictions? Should we do some crystal balling, or would you like to stop for any questions?
No, let's get the crystal ball out, Becky.
Okay. So a little bit of crystal balling. Obviously, these are just our predictions, my predictions. They're not, who knows, we'll all see. But there are a couple of emerging kind of topics and trends that I think are really going to be important for this year. The first one is around sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these were both incredibly important topics before AI, and they are even more important now as we think about what AI really means for us. It obviously takes a huge amount of work out of some of the traditional processes we have, but it involves an enormous amount of processing power, an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of energy. And I think more and more brands and individuals are questioning whether their goals around ESG and living sustainably are in sync with the benefits of using AI to power certain parts of their lives. So we've seen an increasing demand for greener solutions and greater transparency in other areas of tech and of consumer goods, and I think AI is going to be no exception. So at the Brandtech Group, what we're doing is launching a sustainability study into the kind of carbon footprint of training, fine-tuning, and using Gen AI for inference versus the way we do marketing and create content today. So it'd be really interesting to be able to understand and see what is the net outcome, and also how do we mitigate for that. But as an individual, I think you can also make certain decisions. More and more powerful, smaller models are being launched. They're much lighter in terms of their training data, which means they're much easier to run and faster, and we presume have a significantly lower impact. And often they do a particular task, a focused task, sometimes even better or faster than the larger models. So you can be quite choiceful about how you use AI and what you decide to work with. So that's one way in which you can kind of embrace that is definitely going to be a huge question to be answered this year. The second prediction is back to my favorite topic around copyright. It is still going to be the battlefield for AI in 2024. It's both the use of copyrighted material in the development of AI systems, but also the status of work that is created by or with the help of AI. So there are some things you can do. You can opt to use models that are trained on fully copyright cleared content. So all the traditional stock image providers have these now: Adobe, Getty, Shutterstock. It's fully licensed. The creators were all paid, whose work went into the training data, and the work that you generate is licensed to you with a royalty paid back to the original creators. So there is a more ethical, a more copyright approved way of doing this if you want to take that route. But you can also train your own models on imagery that you have. This is becoming much easier. And as a creator, you may have a huge wealth of brilliant material that you can use to train a model on and focus on creating imagery in your own style, for example. So there are ways in which you can also kind of be protected a little bit from what's happening in the copyright space.
Becky, I'm just going to jump in with a question from Matt. So, excuse me. He says, the generative AI involving the woman in the sweater that we just saw, is that something now that would violate any of the rules established by the SAG strike, the writer's strike, or is it not affected as this type of work is considered like non-union?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And I'll be honest, I have absolutely no idea. So something we should follow up with, and I will follow up to answer your question specifically about how it impacts with SAG. My guess would be no, because it's not a real person who has been recreated in AI. It's not using the likeness of somebody. But I will double check. But my instinct would be no. I think the SAG discussion has been around the recreation of real actors and using their likeness for things that are either approved or not approved, but an independently created synthetic person would not be subject to that, I don't believe.
Cool. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, by the way.
No, it's a great question.
Good conversation, isn't it? Like, these are the types of things that come up.
Absolutely. These are good questions.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No problem. The third one, I think you will all be aware of more than anybody else. Video is absolutely the next frontier. It's an obvious thing to say, but also there is so much incredible tech, and it's all there. So I think Runway gets a lot of the discussion, but actually, as I just demonstrated, stable video is incredibly powerful. Midjourney is bringing video out. Meta Video Poet from Google is excellent. Runway remains excellent, and the level of control and nuance in Runway remains really excellent. Pika Labs is like stolen a march. It kind of came from nowhere and is really a kind of firm creator favorite. So I think there's so much coming in video. My advice here is kind of just keep experimenting, keep trying, keep working with things. If one particular tool isn't working for you, try another. If that tool in isolation doesn't work, pair it with something else, upscale it, come back, look at Motion Brush, apply motion in just a single instance. Whatever it is that works, like really have to play to find that magic formula. But video is going to be incredibly exciting. The next one is the rise of brand GPT. So I think this is going to be very interesting. More and more businesses that we're talking to, and maybe the kind of advertisers that MoFilmers are working with, are talking about kind of creating their own brand GPT. So they sit on huge pockets of proprietary data about all of the imagery they've created in the past, for example, or their brand style and that kind of thing. And they're using that to create their own models that kind of speak brand, that are trained on their own brand. And that's an incredibly exciting development. I think it's going to happen on an individual level too. More and more will each be running, you'll be running your Harriet GPT, that's trained to answer like you, whatever it might be. So I think this personalization of AI, both for businesses and employees and individuals, is coming more and more tailored towards us, towards our needs and our preferences. At the group, we have a tool called Pencil, which creates end-to-end kind of Gen AI for advertising, helping create Facebook posts and that kind of thing. And we are preparing to let brands like BYOM, like bring your own model that you've created elsewhere and plug it in so that you have this kind of application layer to create advertising and content using your own model. And for those that can't make their own models, bring their own data, and we'll help them do that. So I think there's a real sense of leveraging data and maybe yeah, maybe even freeing data from like the pockets and silos it's been in the past to make it really useful and usable. And the last prediction is actually around natural language. So I think we're going to see a huge acceleration in the use of natural language as the dominant mode for prompting for what you're looking for. There is still a real craft to prompting, and in many cases, prompts don't make a lot of sense necessarily. We don't really know which pieces are being driving the greatest outcomes. You can be quite sophisticated, weighting different elements of your prompts and that kind of thing. But it's still quite an art, and it's somewhat akin to coding in some cases. Like for some people, it's just not something that they are able to get great results with. And we're seeing a real move towards conversational interfaces, more iterative, more accessible, more useful kind of ways to prompt using natural language. We're certainly making a lot of our AI applications conversation-based. So you just start a conversation talking about what it is that you need, and you're almost interviewed by AI to ask all the right questions. It's like extracting a brief, kind of, ask the right questions so that the right information is drawn out of you, and then the prompt is almost created by the AI itself. So I think this move, I think we're going to see it in lots of consumer applications of AI as well as lots of business applications, but we'll just be using it in a much more conversational way where we almost don't realize we're doing it, as opposed to the very conscious process of sitting down to prompt today, certainly for things like image generation, is much more precise. And I think we're going to see a move away from that, which I think will see a marked increase in how much daily use of AI we're actually all engaging in, because it's a less intentional thing. And kind of leads back to my very first point, which is the fact that these big tech companies that we all use every day, like Google and Microsoft, have invested in so much of this capability, means that you'll be using it conversationally, and you'll be using it in applications you open every day without thinking. And therefore the kind of our acceptance and our use of AI and our how much we don't even see it, I think is just going to go through the roof. And those are my predictions. So I would love to take any questions.
What a wonderful crystal ball, Becky. Thank you so much. So insightful. And I know we are over time, but there are a couple of questions in the chat. So maybe we can just run through those, and then we'll let everybody leave and go and do what they need to do. But
Sure.
I had a question from Nish, who said, never thought of the content of the prompt as a way to assessing potential copyright issues. I wonder if we could use ChatGPT or train a model to assess that risk, or help us assess that risk, or should it just be a feature of all Gen AI tools? Like, is that something that's possible? Can you put
absolutely.
that in?
Both suggestions are fantastic, actually. So we're seeing there is a lot of possibility to bake mitigation into tools. So obviously we have our own tool, and in that layer, we have made it so that you cannot add a proper noun into your prompt, for example, so that you're much less likely to infringe. There's lots you can build in, and all of the technology providers, I'm sure, are working on ways in which to mitigate either explicitly or implicitly how they cover for that. But the other suggestion is also great. The kind of AI on AI is also a really good model for how we both look at compliance for like brands and content that has strong compliance needs, for example, but also ways to like mitigate risk and assess how risky is this is a really good idea. So yeah, I think we'll see both of those things.
I think if these companies are offering protection as well for their users, it's only in their benefit to try and limit the potential risk.
Absolutely, 100%.
It feels inevitable, really.
Definitely.
Amazing. That kind of actually leads on to another question we have in here, which is if you were to create a narrative series that's born from your own mind for distribution, say, is there any, like, what is the protection of that creator for that world and those characters that you have come up with? Like, could other people then benefit from that and use them in their own right? I guess at the moment, kind of.
It's still an open question. So there's a lot of discussion around how much human tweaking, how much human work, investment turns something into something that might be protectable. In many countries outside of the UK, something authored by not by a human is not copyright protectable, and that's the challenge that we're kind of facing. But how much human interaction is enough? You may have seen there's been lots of cases, somebody who created a comic book, for example, working with AI, but very much prompted and being very precise. How much of that is her and how much of that is AI? Is it protectable or not? So at the moment, that is still a very open question around what's protectable or not. There are things you can do. You can look at the different platforms. Some allow you to operate in kind of a stealth mode. Some allow you to say no to training so that your work doesn't get ingested back into training data sets. So, you also need to look at which of them offer you IP, offer you ownership of the work that you generate, and whether or not they take a license to go and use it again for something else. So you need to be really looking at the terms of service. There are ways in which to work with tools that give you more protection, more ownership, but blanket kind of protection from copyright is still not decided.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope that helps. So I think we'll have to leave it there, everybody, as we've run over by 5 minutes, and we'll let everybody do what they need to do now. But thank you so much, Becky. Honestly, it's so helpful and insightful, and it's something that's in our minds at MoFilm all the time, and we're looking at ways that we can where it will feel more natural in all of our daily processes and stuff. So it's amazing to kind of be thinking about where it's going to be. Where will we be when we have this conversation this time next year? Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredibly exciting space. So thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. Thank you for the brilliant questions, and I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody. Goodbye.